grab your cross and find some wall meat on today's episode of Playing with Fear. Welcome to Joblo Horror Originals Playing with Fear, where we take a look at some of the landmark horror titles throughout the history of gaming. It's been a bit since we've done a non-licensed game, so today we're looking at one of the all-time classics. Castlevania has been around for 35 years now, and it's a big part of gaming history. Honestly, probably about as big as anything else we've covered so far. It's evolved with the times, and there's rarely been a system released without it whipping its way onto it. It survived moves to 3D and back, had remakes, and is half of an important genre movement by putting the Vania in Metroidvania. I'd like to thank you guys for watching Playing with Fear, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. Konami is a powerhouse of a publisher. Well, they were anyway. Today they don't really publish or develop new games, but rather release compilations or single ROM releases of many of their older and classic titles. From a game preservation standpoint, this is fantastic. For a longtime fan looking for new content, however, it's rough. No new Gradius, Castlevania, or Silent Hill on the horizon unless you count pachinko machines, which we don't. They started before the great video game crash and thrived after. Konami as a game company was founded by Kajimasa Kazuki in 1973, and I promise one day I'll get these names right. They were originally a jukebox rental and repair company. They moved into the world of arcade game production in 1978 with their first 4 games being released. No doubt their biggest release in the early years would be Frogger from 1981. Even those that don't really know gaming know what Frogger is through pop culture or just seeing the classic screen of it. Well, that and Frogger has been copied as many times as Pac-Man, so even if you don't know Frogger, you know something that is the same type of gameplay with a slightly different skin. As the 80s would continue, many of their arcade games would get ported to home consoles and computers, while Nintendo specifically would see them as a valuable partner. Even when Nintendo implemented a strict code of how many games a year a company could produce for their systems, Konami was allowed to make a sub-label called Ultra Games so they could double their output. It worked out on both sides pretty well, I'd say, and gave us gamers some absolute classics on their systems. Akumaju Dracula was developed at Konami by Hitoshi Akumatsu with the hope of recreating the look and feel of the classic monsters of Hammer and Universal. Apparently, many Japanese developers were in love with movies from the West at the time, and according to an AMA with another Konami developer, Akumatsu was in love with Indiana Jones specifically, and that's why a whip is the primary weapon. The game was designed to be a horror-action hybrid with the original title translating to Devil's Castle Dracula. Well, that's just not going to do for Nintendo of America, so they had the name changed to Castlevania and a mega franchise was born. The game was released in Japan first on September 26, 1986 for the Famicom, and then in the US and Europe on May 1st of 87 and December 19th of 88 respectively. It would get ports to the MS-DOS, Amiga, and Commodore 64 in 1990. We'll touch on those in a bit because of how different they look and play, while still being the bones of the original game. Every 100 years, Count Dracula is summoned by the forces of darkness to take his place as the Lord of Chaos and inhabit his castle. Every 100 years, it is the sworn duty of the Belmont clan to end the curse that overtakes Transylvania and put Dracula away for another 100 years. It is 1691 and Dracula has been brought back. It's up to current Belmont Simon to use the family weapon, a whip called the Vampire Killer, to make his way through the castle and defeat Dracula. Simon makes his way through 6 parts of the castle that are all guarded by followers of Dracula, with his most trusted acolytes and creations used as guards to get into the next area. Simon goes from the outside of the castle through the foyer where he has to battle a giant bat. Next, he climbs through the ranks of armored ghost knights to find himself face to face with Queen Medusa, who guards the entrance to the outer wall, which is the only way up. That outer wall is guarded by a pair of mummy kings who, when dispatched, drop Simon into the massive dungeon of the castle. This dungeon is full of death and bones, and when Simon works his way out, he's stopped by Frankenstein's monster and a hunchback named Igor. The exit to the lab takes Simon through the library and an army of skeleton warriors and undead knights. The final guard before Dracula is Death himself. Getting past Death leads to the final climb into the inner sanctum where Dracula presides. The final challenge is to defeat Dracula, but when Simon is able to seemingly kill him, he changes into his final form and the real final battle begins. Dracula is much more powerful in this form, and Simon uses a combination of holy water and his trusty vampire killer whip to send Dracula away for another 100 years. Man, I can't believe I got 3 paragraphs out of an NES story explanation. Long before it was half the vaunted Metroidvania style of games, Castlevania was a side-scrolling action platformer. You take control of Simon Belmont, and the controls are simple. You can walk left or right, walk up or down stairs, and jump straight up or in either direction. The jump is a commitment, as you can't change direction in midair. Your other actions are to use your whip or your sub-weapon if you have one. There is a dedicated attack button, and to throw the sub-weapon, you hold up and attack. Your whip, the Vampire Killer, can be upgraded twice, from a leather whip to a stronger chain whip, and then again to a longer version of that second iteration. Thankfully, it doesn't go away when you get hit like it does in future games, though when you die, you do have to rebuild it up again. The sub-weapons are a knife, an axe, a stopwatch, a cross boomerang, and jars of holy water. In a lot of games of the time, finding hearts would add to your life, but in this case, finding a heart adds to the amount of sub-weapons you can use. Find a small heart and it gives you 1, while the larger heart will give you a chunk of 5. Each use of your sub-weapon costs 1 heart, with the exception of the stopwatch, which costs 5. You are stopping time after all. Your whip deals out damage based on the upgrade you have for it, as well as what enemy you're attacking. The sub-weapons work similarly, but have different functions as well. The knife flies in a straight line and goes incredibly fast. The axe is more powerful, but flies in a specific arc. The cross boomerang goes straight and comes back to you. The holy water lands a few feet in front of you and deals damage while also stalling the target. And the stopwatch will stop time temporarily to make it easy for you to pass. Personally, I love saving the watch for the eternally annoying Medusa heads you encounter first in level 2. All these items are found in one of 2 ways. They're either dropped by defeated enemies, or found by hitting the hundreds of candles found within the castle. This is one of those wonderful video game logic pieces that you just don't question regardless of space and physics constraints. There are other items to collect as well. You can find a money bag that will either be red, white, or blue, America, that will give you points based on the color with 100, 400, and 700. Points are also rewarded for beating levels, defeating enemies, and even enemy projectiles that can lead to extra lives. Other collectibles include non-throwing crosses that will evaporate every enemy on screen, a jug of invisibility potion that allows you to pass through enemies and their projectiles, a double or triple shot that allows you to throw your items in quicker succession, making things like the holy water and cross nearly unstoppable, and finally, meat. The meat is what allows you to refill your health during the level. When you beat a level, your health bar is completely refilled, but during the level, if you get hit, your only option is to chow down on these Castlevanian delicacies. Commonly referred to as wall meat, as you can often find them hidden away in breakable walls, this item has received a life of its own outside the games as well. The final item is really only an activation switch of sorts to end each level. Once you defeat the stage boss, there's a crystal that drops on the ground. Simply walk over it and the level ends, while giving you all of your life back as well. The items are spread out pretty well throughout each level, and while the game is hard, as in the famous Nintendo hard moniker, with practice you can get through it. There are 6 stages, and each one is within the castle, but a different area of that castle. The enemies you encounter are the small bat, zombie, leopard, fishman, raven, Medusa head, black knight, skeletons both white and red, hunchback, axeman, ghost, eagle, skeledragon, and the dragon skull cannon. Not the largest pool of baddies to take on, but the placement and usage of them makes the game work. They also fit perfectly Not You Eagle with the gothic horror aesthetic the game is going for. While the enemies all take a few hits with the whip or the sub-weapon, the bosses at the end of each stage all have full health bars that require a bit more strategy. They include the Phantom Bat, Queen Medusa, Dual Mummies, Frankenstein's monster with Igor, and yes, the instruction manual says just Frankenstein, but I refuse to be that guy, the Grim Reaper, and finally Count Dracula in a 2-phase fight. Is Castlevania scary? No, but in the late 80s, neither were the Hammer or Universal monster movies that inspired the game. Castlevania does do everything in its power to pay loving homage to those eras though. The settings and the creatures are all from those films, and they use items from that era to push the feel even further. During the end credits, you get featured players like Boris Karloffis, Christopher B., and Trans Fisher to represent the greats from that era. Seriously, watch the credits, it's hilarious. It's a wonderful bookend, too, to the opening title screen having the film reel borders. You, as the player, were watching a movie as well as playing the game. Honestly, the scariest part of this game is getting hit mid-jump and watching as you helplessly plummet to your doom. Castlevania has more of a legacy than most games or even movies we post on the channel. In addition to 2 sequels on the NES making up a coveted trilogy of wonderful games, the franchise would make its way to nearly every console and console generation. Eventually, it split off into 2 different types of Castlevania games, with Symphony of the Night starting a whole new set of games, while the traditional 2D ones would slow down a bit. Castlevania would make its way to 3D with decidedly mixed results, and all through the nearly 4 decades it's been around, we would see releases of the classics on nearly everything from Windows to the Game Boy Advance to the Wii Virtual Console. The Konami IP would even get a Netflix show that was wildly popular. The best way to play it currently is through the Castlevania Anniversary Collection that's available on all current consoles. You get a collection of 8 games that you can play on either the US or Japanese ROMs. Some of the differences make it to where you get a whole new experience out of the title. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the music throughout the series. They've had full concert and album releases, and the music is some of the most revered throughout the history of gaming. Castlevania hasn't had a new entry in a bit. Get out of here, mobile releases. But the series isn't going away anytime soon. Konami may be terrible at releasing new entries into their beloved franchises, but they're more than okay re-releasing their classics. Contra, Castlevania, and even the TMNT games in an upcoming package all got wonderful treatment recently. What's your favorite Castlevania game? What do you want to see from the franchise in the future? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you on the next episode of Playing with Fear. Welcome back to Joblo Horror Videos Playing with Fear, where we take a look at some of the landmark horror titles throughout the history of gaming. Today we will discuss an often overlooked title in the history of gaming, burdened primarily by releasing on a largely unsuccessful platform in the Atari Jaguar.
Jaguar! Jaguar! Jaguar!
Not only is Alien vs. Predator a reason to own Atari's failed 64-bit console, but it laid the groundwork for how to do a horror license justice in video game form and added unseen depth to the first-person shooter genre. In 1979, Ridley Scott unleashed the horror masterpiece Alien onto the world, and, much like other successful franchises, it would get the video game treatment. Beginning with the aptly named Alien on the Atari 2600 in 1982, game developers would try a handful of different approaches to game design. Pac-Man clones, top-down escape simulators, and side-scrolling action set pieces all made the rounds for the property throughout the early 80s and 90s. Each new film, 1986's Aliens from James Cameron, and David Fincher's Alien 3 from 1992, would bring additional games in varying styles, all starring the dangerous xenomorph. The first film, while being steeped in science fiction, eventually becomes a sort of space slasher film, with the alien picking off the crew members one by one until Ripley, the film's final girl, finally blows the creature out into space. Spoiler alert for a 42-year-old film that you should have absolutely seen already. While the film boasts a great score, memorable set design, and fairly good acting, it was the xenomorph, designed by Swiss artist H.R. Geiger, that became the standout and icon of the film. 1987 would give us another cinematic extraterrestrial classic with the Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle Predator. Following Dutch and his military unit in the jungle under the false pretenses of rescuing a foreign cabinet minister, the film sees the unit stalked by an extremely talented and dangerous hunter in the form of the Predator. One by one, the team is taken out by the creature until only Dutch is left to take out the monster. Gee, sounds familiar when you say it like that. Similarly to the Alien franchise, Predator would spawn a sequel and get the video game treatment, though less on both counts. The first game would be Predator on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1987 to coincide with the film, followed by games of the second film in 1990 and 1992 for various microcomputers, and later the 3 mainline Sega systems. Both of these franchises and their respective medias were popular, but they wouldn't meet until Dark Horse Comics released the first series, Alien vs. Predator, in 1989. They would continue to publish this matchup for over 30 years, and the plots would influence toy lines, novels, big-budget movies, and of course, video games. The first of these virtual fights to the death would be the Super Nintendo side-scrolling beat-em-up Alien vs. Predator. You take control of a predator who receives a distress signal from Vega 4, where a nest of aliens has taken control. Less there to save the colonists and more to challenge yourself to a good hunt, the predator fights through 6 stages in a procedural, if not overly difficult, beat-em-up game. This concept would be taken further and better 8 months later when Capcom released the all-time classic Alien vs. Predator. Taking the beat-em-up, action, and ratcheting up to 11, this arcade exclusive would see up to 3 players choose from either 2 predators or 2 humans, including Dutch from the 87 original film, and go on a hunt to eradicate the aliens, Queen included, from a fictionalized city in Southern California. While this game is an undisputed classic, it doesn't really capture the horror action vibe that the original films looked to create. It instead very closely resembles a comic book set in motion, with the humans being more cyborg in appearance, and the overall experience being more akin to a cartoon in a video game form. Enter developer Rebellion. Rebellion was founded in Oxford, England by the Kingsley brothers, Jason and Chris. They presented the idea for a 3D Dragon Flight game to Atari UK, who were so impressed that they were hired on to make 2 games for the upcoming Atari Jaguar system. One of these 2 was Alien vs. Predator. You are the final alien drone. Your queen has been kidnapped and your only goal is to rescue her before she is killed for sport or used as a weapon by the humans. Making your way through vents and various floors, you bite, claw, and whip your tail against predators and marines alike. After battling through enemy lines, you are able to save your queen and ensure your species will thrive and dominate. You are a nameless predator. Your ship is docked onto the Golgotha training base after receiving a distress call from the inhabitants. You are not there to help though. No, you are there to hunt down an alien queen and bring honor and glory to your clan by collecting her skull. Using all the hunting weapons at your disposal, you sneak and kill your way through marines looking to survive and alien drones looking to protect their queen. When all is said and done, you battle through the nest and bring honor to you and your clan with the skull of the queen of a powerful race. You are Private Lance J. Lewis. The base has been overrun by aliens and predators. You have no weapons or way to get help. Your one goal is to blow the ship to Kingdom Come with the self-destruct failsafe and get out alive before it goes off. Finding clearance keycards and weapons left throughout the vessel, you take the elevators and vents to get you where you need to be. You work your way to the Queen Alien nest where she is the last obstacle between you and the bomb. Defeating her and setting the timer, you barely make it to the escape pod before the ship and everything else inside of it blows. Okay, so the story isn't the expository revelation that later horror games tried to flesh out, but look at the type of game and the time period. First-person shooters barely had more than a text screen of story in the beginning and end of the game in those early years. The basis for the game had a lot to pull from, but the time constraints on the game for a brand new system, as well as the developers still figuring out what they could and couldn't do in a first-person shooter, left the story on the back burner. In terms of gameplay, did you notice there were 3 storylines for 3 characters back there? Up to this point in FPS games, the player would follow the exploits of one character through multiple levels or episodes, but AVP gives the player the option to play as the alien, predator, or marine right off the bat. This was a huge innovation that AVP brought to the genre, and even then, it didn't catch on as a regular feature throughout the FPS genre like it did in, say, third-person survival horror games. First, let's discuss the Marine, as he's the most complex of the 3 playable characters. On the surface, your goal is to blow up the ship and escape, but the way you do it is different from your average mid-90s FPS. When you awaken out of cryosleep, you are completely defenseless. Thankfully, walking out of the first room nets you your first weapon, a shotgun. The Marine plays out much closer to survival horror than the FPS games before. id Software's landmark shooters Wolfenstein 3D and Doom were littered with ammo, and the main goal was to shoot your way through enemies while finding keys to aid in your progression. AVP treats the situation much differently. First off, ammo is not abundant. There's usually a better case to flee rather than fight, or at the very least, pick your battles. Second, the Marine does have to find keys, but they're no longer just the color-coded squares you'd see in past games. He must find the clues written in the logs on various computer stations to find out where the keys are to get him to the next floor. As you progress, you will find a pulse rifle, flamethrower, and smart gun to beef up your arsenal. In addition to these armaments from the films, you will also be able to find and use the tracking device that will show you how many enemies are near and their location, or at least direction. Another strategy when fighting the alien enemies is where to kill them. Just like their movie counterparts, their blood is deadly acid, and if the player character walks over it, they will lose some health. Shooting an alien in a doorway is a quick way to guarantee health issues on that floor. Unfortunately, in the vent areas, there's no way around this, and you just need to have the health to make it through. The facehugger aliens will also ruin your day in this game by jumping on your face and not only damaging you, but covering your field of view. Next up is the Predator. While your mission is as straightforward as can be, kill the alien queen and bring back her skull, your means to get there are not what you would expect. The Predator works with an honor system. Sure, you can use your invisibility cloak often to silently kill your foes, but this is seen as dishonorable, and you will lose unlock points. These unlock points are used to unlock your full arsenal. The claw, staff, disc blade, and plasma cannon are all here, but only by honor killing will you unlock them. While you are bigger and scarier than your human counterpart, you will still take damage from both alien facehuggers and the corpses of your fallen enemies. While the Predator does not require clearance keys, he also cannot use the vent system. He takes elevators to the different floors and clears them out to unlock his arsenal and work his way to the Queen. Probably the easiest of the 3 modes, the Predator is also the most overpowered of the 3 characters. In addition to weapon choices, the Predator also has multiple vision modes to help him on his quest. The final character is of course the alien. The alien character is the weakest of the 3 choices, but also has the game's most interesting mechanic. You can cocoon a marine enemy so that when you die, and since the alien character cannot find medkits like the other 2, you will absolutely die, then you will appear in one of up to 5 available cocoon slots you have left in the level. While you can save at any time like you can with the Marine and the Predator, this mode gives you an almost unlimited number of lives, so as long as you remember to cocoon Marines every now and again, you'll be fine. The alien is armed with a claw, tail, and bite attack. He does not need to find keys and doesn't bother with the elevator to change forms, only slinking through the vents to move through the different levels. While having the least number of weapons and the least access to health, the alien is certainly the most unique player choice found in the game. There are certainly a lot of things this game does to push a scary environment. There's no music in the game. Gone are the blips of Wolfenstein or the iconic death metal MIDI tracks of Doom. The only background noise is the low hum of the power from the ship. It's a nice touch. To tie into the lack of music, the screech of the aliens when they spot you will surely put some sweat on your brow. And an even better use of sound design, however, is the tell that a predator is stalking you. With the iconic distorted whisper, the predator will let you know it's coming for you long before you see it. Finally, once you get the motion tracker, it can be helpful, but the blips will also add extra stress to your day. Is the game scary nowadays? Certainly not compared to the later AVP games or current horror first-person shooters, but it still has a spooky charm. Was it scary in 1995? Absolutely. Between the digitized sprites of aliens and predators, as well as all of the above-mentioned gameplay and audio design, there really wasn't anything else like it, and much of what made it so unique is still effective today. The legacy here is both multifaceted and complicated. The game was released in 1995, and 26 years later has never received a port or remaster. Jaguar emulation is spotty at best, and of course this is one of the more expensive Jaguar games to pick up. In addition, many of the horror or survival horror elements were tweaked or even skipped entirely by the horror FPS titles of the mid-1990s. Games like System Shock or Blood are fantastic horror games in their own right, but are also completely different from AVP. While we would get a slow release of Alien or Predator games here and there, we wouldn't get a true horror experience until 2014's Alien Isolation. There is a feel-good story here, though. While the Jaguar system was an objective failure, the game itself sold well, and Rebellion, the studio behind it, was able to make quite the career out of their entry to the Jaguar. Not only are they still making games today, but were able to remake their vision of Alien vs. Predator twice, in 1999 for the PC, and again in 2010 for the PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. While those two and other AVP games are certainly more accessible to play, they surely wouldn't exist without the first steps taken here. Have any of you out there played this? What are your favorite Alien vs. Predator games? Let us know in the comments. Today we're diving into one of the most influential games of all time. Doom isn't just one of the most influential shooters of all time. It isn't just one of the greatest games ever, with new content still being created for nearly 30 years after. It's one of those titles that everyone should play at least once in their life. Now obviously, better and smarter folks than I have tried to place it into historical context, but I'm going to do my best, as the game deserves the respect on its name, and it's one of my all-time favorites that I revisit constantly, so I have to give it a go. id Software deserves, and has received, plenty of its own videos detailing the staff, journey, and importance, but that's not for today. Special mention to John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, Tom Hall, John Romero, Tim Willits, Bobby Prince, American McGee, and Sandy Peterson, who were all instrumental in the creation and shaping of Doom, and who all have gone on to other successful and non-successful, looking at you, Daikatana, projects. id had multiple big projects that led to Doom, however, including a couple first-person adventures not named Wolfenstein 3D. The first of these projects was Commander Keen, whose first game, Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticons, was released on December 14th, 1990 to very good reviews and sales. Sales is a little tricky, however, as it would be the beginning of the shareware model of sales, wherein the first chunk of game was free and you paid for the remaining chapters. This model would continue for id all the way through Doom. Commander Keen would be one of the many side-scrolling action games popular in the late 80s and early 90s, but would seem to be more advanced than the others and end up with 4 more games, culminating in the Game Boy Color release of Commander Keen in 2001. The next big jump would be to the first-person perspective with Hover Tank 3D and Catacombs 3D in April and November of 1991 respectively. Hover Tank 3D has the player controlling Brick Sledge, fantastic name, during nuclear war. The goal is to rescue civilians within levels and shoot your way past those who were mutated by the radiation. A radar at the bottom of the screen shows you where you still have hostages to rescue, and if you didn't know this was made before Doom, you would just assume it was a Doom clone, a term thrown around everywhere in the early and mid-1990s. Catacombs 3D was the third game in the series, getting the cool 80s horror honor of having the third in the series be 3D, and followed the adventures of High Wizard Patton Everhale, again with these names, trying to rescue his friend Grelmanar, who is held by an evil lich named Nemesis in the catacombs below a town cemetery. The game was a little bit more advanced than Hover Tank, including a hub, much more varied weapons, enemies, and locales, and even showing your head deteriorate as you took damage until you were left with just a skull. While Hovertank 3D would be forgotten about, Catacombs 3D would get its own trilogy of sequels, though not developed by id themselves. A neat little series to check out for fans of really early FPS games. Next would be a heavy hitter that would not only have quite the legacy itself, but also lay the groundwork for Doom. Wolfenstein 3D wasn't an original creation for id, but they turned it into the classic we all know and love. Castle Wolfenstein was released in 1981 by Muse Software and was a vastly different experience than what we would come to know. Creator Silas Warner was inspired by war movies like The Guns of Navarone and early adventure games like Berge to create a stealth action game where you escape the titular castle while stealing Nazi plans. The main goal was to use stealth, but you could also steal clothes off any guard you killed to help you get by. The game would be released for the Apple II, MS-DOS, and Commodore 64. 1984's Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, released for the same systems, would follow presumably the same soldier as he used the same sneaking and disguise techniques to this time plant a bomb outside the meeting room of the bunker Hitler used in the waning days of the war. The games look strikingly similar, although Beyond certainly has the more detailed character models and movement. The first game did very well with both consumers and critics, but the second wouldn't capture nearly the same praise or sales, with most feeling that there just wasn't nearly enough improvement over the 3 years between games. id would change that perception so much, in fact, with Wolfenstein 3D, boy did they ever like the 3D moniker, that most people wouldn't know the game had 2 prior entries. Released in 1992, this time the soldier would be boisterously named BJ Blazkowicz, and there would be no more sneaking involved. The player would traverse 6 different episodes, with the first 3 culminating in the player killing Hitler, and the second set being a prequel trilogy leading up to your capture and incarceration inside Castle Wolfenstein. Even with Hovertank 3D and Catacombs 3D, there had never been anything quite like this game. There would be a sequel called Spear of Destiny, followed by attempts every decade or so to revive the series with varying degrees of success, until Machine Games would make it stick in 2014 and even get multiple games out of it. So, how do you improve on one of the most innovative and celebrated games of all time? By sending it to hell. 1993's Doom would take everything they revolutionized with Wolfenstein 3D and turn it on its head with a much deeper world, more vibrant colors, height and scale to the environments, and pretty much everything else you can imagine. While the original game is tame nearly 30 years on, it was unlike any other horror game released and would rule the industry while providing ripples that would run even up to today and into the future of the gaming landscape. That sounds like a bit much, but there are still levels being created today for the first game's engine with things the developers of the original could only dream of. While I mentioned the original is definitely a horror game, the purpose of this video is to give a shout out to some of the entries that are really scary. It's kind of a running joke that Doom has been ported or made to work on everything, and while those first few ports are interesting, like the Atari Jaguar and 32X, amazing that they exist, like the Super Nintendo or Game Boy Advance, or legendarily bad like the Saturn and 3DO ports, the ports I want to focus on today is the custom PlayStation edition of Doom for the Sony PlayStation in 1995, the official sequel to Doom 2 for Nintendo 64 called Doom 64, released in 1997, and the survival horror take on the franchise with the confusingly named Doom 3, an actual reboot of the series. Launched 2 years after Doom and just 2 months after the release of the Sony PlayStation, Doom for the PS1 allowed console gamers to play a little bit of everything that the Doom series had to offer. Up to that point, Doom 2 was released in 1994, and the Ultimate Doom earlier in 95 that added a 4th episode to the game. Williams, who developed the game, isn't who you'd guess as the first choice, as they were mostly known as a pinball and arcade manufacturer, but they were able to put together an incredible version of Doom. The game would put Doom and Doom 2 together, with some concessions. Okay, first the bad. This edition cuts some levels out entirely and reduces certain levels to make it easier to build out. In addition to this, 2 of the more advanced enemy types that both appeared in Doom 2, the Archvile and final boss, the Icon of Sin, were both taken out. This is due to limitations of the hardware, with the Icon of Sin being able to spawn any enemy type in the game, and the Archvile having more frames of animation than most enemies, as well as being able to resurrect most fallen enemies. Quite frankly, the Icon of Sin is a terrible final boss, so no real loss there, but the Archvile would have been cool to take on, especially with some of the perks that this custom edition offered. While you do lose some levels, the total count isn't reduced. The developers were able to plug in newly made levels that weren't available in any other edition. This is a fun discovery to players from the PC original, but the best parts of this game are the other changes. While the sound effects and MIDI soundtrack from Bobby Prince are incredible pieces of gaming history, Aubrey Hodges was able to craft an eerie and disturbing soundtrack that revolves around ambient noises, heavy breathing, and what sounds like babies crying. The sound effects here have a deeper impact as well. The groans of both the player and the monsters sound much more damaging and desperate, and the weapons have a much grittier heft to them. Lighting has changed to include multiple colors in some places and no light at all in others. While this can make the game creepier, in a few instances it also makes it nearly unplayable. Another fun addition, well if you cheat, is to be able to use Doom 2's super shotgun through the entirety of the first campaign. That's not all, however, as if you play on the ultraviolence or nightmare difficulty, you will experience a surprise as early as the first level. In the roundabout of the second room, you will run right into a chain gunner or heavy weapon dude, and that will signal this isn't your normal Doom. Revenants popping up around corners, pain elements in formerly abandoned rooms, even Mancubus guards in the Tower of Babel fight against the Cyberdemon. There's even a new-ish monster in the Nightmare Spectre. It's just a bluish-black pink demon, but it's still a nice touch. All the additions mentioned above, as well as little things like the hellscapes in hell looking scarier, and even the bright yellow fire sky backgrounds, all add to a level of unease and fright that hadn't been seen before or since in a Doom game. The uniqueness of the custom PlayStation Edition cannot be understated, and should be experienced by any fan of the games looking to shake things up. While there is a PC mod to emulate these features, it just doesn't feel the same. The best way to experience it is through the PlayStation original hardware. I mean, just look at that box art. Most people, myself included, incorrectly assume this was just the original game ported to the N64 with updated graphics and sound, but it's actually a vital part of the overarching story that was continued into the recent Doom Eternal. It also happens to be one of the scarier editions too. Featuring the same sound effects and haunting score by Mr. Hodges, Doom 64 is a whole new set of levels with updated villains, weapons, and mechanics. Released in 1997 and published by Midway Games, Doom 64 became one of the best first-person shooters for consoles that was forgotten within its own genre and on its own system. The N64 controller doesn't feel great, but that was fixed a couple of times that we'll touch on later. Being a sequel, it carries over most of the rosters of the first few games with some changes. The pistol, shotgun, double shotgun, chain gun, rocket launcher, plasma rifle, BFG, fist with optional berserker pack, and chainsaw all make a return. Both shotguns feel somewhat neutered, but the BFG, rocket launcher, and chainsaw all make up for it by feeling beefier. A new addition is the Unmaker weapon, with optional upgrade keys that can be found in certain levels. The enemies here follow suit. The Archvile, Chain Gunners, Spider Masterminds, and Revenants take some time off, but the Zombiemen, Shotgunners, Imps, Pink Demons, Spectres, Lost Souls, Cacodemons, Barons of Hell, and Cyberdemons from Doom 1, as well as the Hell Knights, Mancubus, Arachnotrons, and the Lost Soul generating and shooting pain elementals from Doom 2 all appear. New to the roster are the Nightmare Imps, which are like Spectre Imps, and a new final boss with the Mother Demon. Doom 64, and no, there aren't 61 missing Doom games out there, just works. Instead of adapting the original to fit around the new lighting, music, and sound effects, Midway built this one from the ground up to use these new terrifying effects. From the opening credits, you are shown that this is an uphill battle. Marines are getting killed left and right by the full roster of baddies. This isn't Doom 2016 or Eternal where you are the Slayer yet. The traps are harder and meaner, the hell levels especially are more desolate and foreboding, and the secret levels are fun challenges that I would recommend tackling after the main campaign to test what you've learned. The game was unfortunately lost for some time on the N64 hardware, but modders made a PC port that was pretty decent. Being able to play the game with a mouse and keyboard made the experience feel a lot more natural. For the release of Doom Eternal in 2020, Night Dive Studios made a full remaster released for all current consoles, and even added a new set of levels that led directly into the new game. The price tag for this is only $5, and even less when it's on sale. For my money, this is the way to go, as it not only fixes the controller issue, whether you want a good console controller or the ability to play on PC, it makes it look better than ever thought possible. One of the big issues with the original release, similar to the PS1 edition, is the cool dark lighting could just be too damn dark. With Night Dive's new remaster, you get the complete package the best way possible. Unlike Doom 64, which is a sequel that everyone thought was a port or a remake, Doom 3 is a remake that everyone assumed was a sequel. Having played through it a couple times myself, it's undeniably a fun experience, but it also struggles to have that quintessential Doom experience seen both before and after. The main reason is that this is less a game showing off a brand new graphics engine, and more a brand new graphics engine built out with a game to show it off. The game tries to recreate the main story of the original game, albeit with a few more characters and much more story than just kill demons, find keys, go to the exit. While you play as an unnamed Marine per usual, There's also Sergeant Kelly, Elliot Swan, and Jack Campbell as protagonists, while Dr. Malcolm Bertruger is the human villain who is willingly unleashing hell. Bertruger bothers you the whole game, but the roster of enemies is mixed with both familiar and new. Everything from the first 2 games is here, minus the Spider Mastermind, Barons, Pain Elementals, and Spectres. Zombies have been expanded to much more than just the main 3, with unarmed and chainsaw ones added, and there's a whole bunch of new enemies added to mix things up as well. Wraiths, Trites, Ticks, Maggots, and Cherubs appear frequently, with new bosses Vagary, Sabbath, and Guardian rounding out with the final boss battle of the Cyberdemon. The unarmed zombies stumble like in any other horror movie, and all the new creatures were definitely added with scares in mind, often set up with jump scares or set pieces. Action's definitely a part of the gameplay, but it isn't the main crux of this game. Puzzle solving and tasks make up the majority of your mission to stop the demon invasion. You have to watch your air supply at certain points, and there are plenty of rooms set up for the sole purpose to frighten the player with either copious amounts of gore or candlelit rooms with demon symbols etched and drawn everywhere. Bertruger will also make objects move or have the player hallucinate while moving through the UAC base. While the game plays out as one continuous story like Half-Life, they are still set up as levels with autosaving occurring when you reach elevators and airlocks. The weapon lineup keeps the series regulars while also adding a machine gun, grenades, the soul cube, and the very contentious flashlight. It's only technically a weapon because you can smack around enemies with it, but it's more of a tension tool. In the original release, you had to switch back and forth between using the flashlight to see around and using a weapon to fight. While muzzle flashes show you a little light, there are entire areas that are almost completely encased in darkness. Later editions of the game have it strapped to your weapons and you just flick it on or off. This works, and while it reduces some of the fear, the tension still exists as the battery will run out and management is a must. Doom 3 is an experience more than a game. It's way less pick up and play than the previous titles, with longer levels that you have to commit to rather than 5-minute running guns. It's easily the scariest of the franchise and worth a playthrough for fans of horror games or the Doom franchise in general. It was also the first Doom with DLC added. Resurrection of Evil was released in 2005, and when the BFG edition came out for home consoles, there was an additional Lost mission. I know I skipped over the story and some of the other elements to the games, but it's Doom. I feel like even non-gamers have a good grasp of what goes on in it. Doom had multiple sequels, ports on nearly everything, countless player-developed level packs, 2 not-so-great movies, toys, comics, novels that gave the player the fun name of Flynn Taggart, board games, and nearly every other kind of merchandise under the sun. The legacy of the games we discussed today is a little more murky. Doom for the PS1 has become somewhat of a collector's item for its sweet long box physical edition, and has a PC mod to its name. We got a PS1 version of Final Doom 2, but while it's still a cool piece of Doom history, it's much more of a mess with the levels being from Final Doom and the Master levels. The problem there is they took 78 levels and boiled them down to 30. It currently isn't available by conventional means, but savvy players can find ways. Doom 64 has become a retro classic, in no small part to Night Dive's lovingly made remaster and added content, and Doom 3 is still as divisive today as it was nearly 20 years ago at release. Both of the latter games are available on current-gen consoles through download, or if you were lucky enough to snag the Limited Run Games Physical Edition or Standard Slayers Collection at retail. Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal took the killer graphics of Doom 3 and the non-stop, uncompromising action of the 90s games and perfected the blend. They were smash hits and should be checked out by all. Looking at these older games, we have a Black Sheep, a best game you've never played, and a lost classic all within the same series. Doom of any kind is worth a look to see if it's good, bad, or just plain bizarre. But if you're looking for the most horror injected into your Doom, look no further than these 3 releases. What are your first memories with Doom? What's your favorite port, release, or edition? Let us know in the comments, and we'll see you in the next episode of Playing with Fear.